Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today, helping to create a better tomorrow on many different fronts. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Uwe Schoenbeck, who is Chief Scientific Officer, Emerging Science and Innovation, and Senior Vice President, Worldwide Research Development and Medical at Pfizer. The Emerging Science and Innovation Group at Pfizer is charged with enhancing their pipeline through translation of external emerging sciences into breakthrough therapies for patients and through outreach to academia, consortia, biotech via its Emerging Science Liaisons, which are located around the globe. The Emerging Science Innovation Group also engages in equity investments as well as seed investments in the formation of new companies. They have a target sciences group that's focused on novel targets and biology and the discovery research component of the business. And then they have this fascinating new Center for Therapeutic Innovation, which goes after cutting-edge science sourced from leading academic and medical centers globally, working in close partnership with the principal investigators and helping to build their pipeline. Dr. Schoenbeck brings 15 years of pharmaceutical drug development experience to Pfizer's R&D executive leadership team. Prior to Pfizer, he served as a VP of Emerging R&D Innovation at Wyeth and Vice President of Cardiovascular Research for Boehringer Ingelheim. And before joining industry, he was Assistant Professor of Medicine at Brigham Women's Hospital, Harvard Medical School. He served as the reviewer for multiple peer-reviewed journals, published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles, research articles, book chapters. He earned his PhD from the University of Kiel in Germany, completed his postdoc work in the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Harvard, before joining as a faculty member. We're lucky to have him with us today. Dr. Uwe Schoenbeck, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
It's great having you. I took a little time to sort of go through your early publications, that you were working on back in the day at Harvard. And, aside from being fascinating, I found it extremely relevant that, 20 years ago, you were working at this intersection of cardiometabolic health, sort of inflammation in the immune system, and of course, sort of this fibrosis bridge between the two. Take us back, if you would, for a couple of minutes, is just sort of the early days, how you got involved in this area, and a little bit of that early career journey and early research journey, if you would.
Sure. I mean, you're going quite back there, but let me see what memory serves. I did my PhD in Germany, as you mentioned, in the area of cell biology and immunology. And back then, immunology was a cutting-edge field. Actually, there was only really one lecture at the university I was at, and I got enamored with with this new emerging area of immune system inflammation, and all feeding into potentially a number of diseases, not just cardiovascular, as you mentioned, but also neuroscience complications, oncology, all of the above. But very little was known. I think back then there were, 2 or 3 textbooks on immunology, and that was it. So I did have an opportunity to work with the professor that was in that space, and through that got really excited about endothelial cell biology and how that might interact with the immune system. I mean, back then it was very simplified. There were B cells, T cells, and macrophages. Besides a few other cells, but those were really the key players. And so the question became, is that it, or is there more interactions with the tissue than just with the blood? And through the endothelial cell biology, I really started to get more and more excited about the cardiovascular system, cardiovascular complications, really trying to better understand how things, for example, myocardial infarction take place, which in the old days was thought to be a very simple platelet-driven clot that just happens somehow magically and causes these very severe complications, if not death. And so it was just the time where we started to understand that the vascular cells, the different cells that make up the blood vessels, really played a central role there as well. And I had then the opportunity to go over to the cardiology division at the Brigham up in Boston, and had an opportunity to work with Peter Libby, one of the leaders in the space of cardiovascular research, obviously. And through that, really then got involved into a specific cascade of immune mediators called CD40, CD40 ligand, which were really thought to be restricted in its expression to T cells. And as it turns out, it was not. It really had a significant impact on cardiovascular cells, endothelial cells, smooth muscle cells, fibroblasts, and so on. And so I had the opportunity to be kind of at the forefront of this emerging area of T cell interactions with vascular cells and how it plays into the genesis of atherosclerotic complications and lesions, but then also how it potentially plays into the kind of complications when these plaques rupture and cause the subsequent closure of the vessel. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I really got excited about immunology, inflammation, and how the link to the cardiovascular system came about.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I ultimately I'll come to the immune system in a little bit when we get into CTI, but I sort of wanted to connect sort of what you're doing in the early days to some of what's happening now. So I appreciate you laying the groundwork for that. Last year, in the Atlantic magazine, there was an article, "Why the Future of Medicine Depends on Collaboration," and you're quoted in this talking about the importance of various collaborative models to create these breakthroughs for patients for the unmet medical needs. The article touches a bit, of course, on BioNTech and Pfizer and mRNA work, and we'll get to that in a bit. But you also, in this article, is also mentioned some of these lesser traditional collaborative models. The EU Innovative Medicines Initiative is mentioned in this Resolute program, which Pfizer's involved in, where you're bringing together literally a dozen academic institutions, other companies. Specifically, it was going after these interesting targets known as, I think, solute carrier transporters. And this is sort of very different in 2022 as a model than sort of what collaboration was all about, say, 20, 30 years ago. Talk a little bit, if you would, about how, not just from your perspective from your early days in pharma, but also some of the work, when you were researching macrophages and atherosclerosis and so forth, a little bit about how that collaborative model has changed from your perspective as you've been working in these different components of the industry.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I mean, I think we've seen some very significant shift in how both sides, academia, biotech, and pharma, look upon partnerships and partnerships among each other as well. In the old days, I think it was really more of a, we give the funds, you give us the IP or the asset, and then we walk separate ways kind of approach in very simple terms. I mean, I don't want to generalize it too much, but I think we've seen those kind of deals in the early days quite a bit. Interaction with academia were, I think, maybe unfocused. It would be my way of describing it. There were often institutional partnerships that went across a broad range of different groups and departments with not always clearly defined deliverables that were expected to come from it. You would just hope to get broader insights into a certain area of biology, for example. I think looking at today, that has shifted significantly. Staying with the academic part first, maybe. I think we're seeing really a stronger interest in working hand in hand with academic PIs, really in a true jointly fashion, doing something that together that neither of us could do alone, but also do this in a very project-focused manner. So, for example, for Pfizer, we've really shifted over from broader institutional partnering to really specific project and PI partnering with very clear deliverables, very clear impact on, on our pipeline and our projects in-house, but also very clear impact on better understanding of the biology. When it comes to biotech, I think we have also seen now a very significant shift where both partners are expected to continue to contribute after the deal is signed. Often, actually, you have the partner continue to drive projects forward. I mean, for us, give you an example, when we did the first gene therapy deals, one of the first partners we worked with was Spark Therapeutics. Yep. At that point, Pfizer had very little experience in clinical development of gene therapy. Spark Therapeutics had some of the leading clinicians in that space, and so they continued to lead originally the clinical development of the program we partnered on. And over time, obviously, we gained more insights into driving the gene therapy portfolio ourselves, but it was really a very strong partnership that allowed this project to go forward. The other thing I think we've started to see more, and I'm curious whether we're going to see more, is also pharma interactions. Yep. You mentioned the IMI initiative out of Europe. It's a consortium, so it's a non-competitive kind of setting. I think we've seen an increasing number where a group of pharmas come together. Often a group of pharma drives actually something to be implemented, where every one of the partners would really benefit from the outcome, and then can go off and do their own kind of drug development efforts and differentiate through that, be it small or large molecules. But we also have seen more and more partnerships on specific programs and assets, where pharma companies come together and really try to develop jointly a set of assets or share assets in different indications. And I think that's something that I would expect to probably continue to happen as we go forward. So very significant shift. I think much more open to really listen to the partner, what their needs are, what their desires are, very clear in articulating what the joint deliverables are, who contributes what to a partnership, but both parties need to contribute beyond the signature.
Let's go into the Centers for Therapeutic Innovation now, because it seems that you've really and I sort of over about 20 years ago now, I had the honor of being a partner company of Pfizer back in the day, and as you were saying, it was based on the old model. We had an asset, there was some money exchanged, and so forth. And I think it was even before you even set up Pfizer Ventures, which is your venture capital unit, and now CTI sort of sits within that continuum of even looking at earlier stage stuff, riskier things, also a venturing component. Talk about that, because this is a really interesting set of sort of a value chain, as I'll call it, of different things that are going on now inside the company. Talk a little about the CTI, and we'll get into some of the unmet medical needs it's addressing in a little bit.
Yeah, sure, happy to do. I think it builds a little bit on what we just talked about. Recognizing there's always great science happening within your own walls. But there's certainly even more great science happening in the rest of the world, because you're just a company of X many people, and the rest of the world is so much bigger and so much, well-funded these days, that you really see a lot of cutting-edge science emerging across the globe, be it here in the US, certainly one of the leaders, but also Europe, Asia Pacific. Our responsibility is to find the best science that fits our needs anywhere in the world. So one thing we recognize, and I think Pfizer was truly a leader here, is that the interaction with academia was fairly limited, as I mentioned to your previous comment already. And we really wanted to find a way that we have a more open interaction with the academic PIs, in the sense that they would be more involved into the drug development process, and we would be more involved into the biology that they are pursuing. But as you know, there are some hesitancies in these interactions. I mean, often in the past, pharma was not willing to let the PI publish, for example, and publications are kind of the lifeblood for academic investigators, as I've experienced myself. And on the other hand, I think there was also a concern that the academic PI was not really in any form or shape involved into advancing the program and helping develop the asset. We found, however, that if you could get into really a truly joint partnership where both investigators work hand in hand together, would really open up a whole new field of accessing cutting-edge external science. So, as you know, Pfizer, maintains a very innovative, world-class pipeline. Our focus really is more and more on first-in-class, if not only-in-class kind of products. And so we really need to find the best available resources to support this. And the CTI model is a kind of a pioneering collaborative drug discovery and development unit, really, that sits within the broader Pfizer R&D organization. The idea is that we would provide drug discovery resources to the investigator and enable the advancement of what is typically an early idea or concept in their mind into a robust drug development program and eventually into therapies for patients that desperately need them. So it's all about identifying the most promising science and investigator in this, then pair it with a Pfizer scientific champion on the inside. So there's two clearly identified leads on both sides, and make sure that we have truly complementary biology and drug discovery activities in each of these groups. So communication is absolutely key. You need to be clear about what's the successful end game supposed to look like and how to get there, who will do what, in that kind of endeavor. And what we bring to the table is obviously funding, but also in-kind support. A lot of the capabilities that Pfizer has, from early discovery to development activities, toxicology, and so on, we're bringing to the table. I think we're also bringing a lot of biology and discovery experience to the table that we have built in our areas of focus. And we're truly dedicated to this being a joint partnership, which means actually the PI and the institution co-own the IP. We have the right to take an exclusive option on it somewhere down the road. But originally, both co-own the IP. Both parties equally contribute to advancing the projects, and both parties are allowed to publish them, which was a decade ago, a really revolutionary system. Since then, I think a lot of our competitors have followed suit a little bit and had similar kind of activities in there. But given that we have now around about a decade or so under our belt, we have actually out of this program advanced 7 of them into the clinic. Out of a total of a little bit more than 100 projects that we have started. And out of these, we actually have a couple of them in phase 1, but also have now obtained already early clinical signs of efficacy in phase 2 trials for another 3 of these programs, which is quite a good success rate if you look at the overall attrition that you have in the industry. And I think we're really proud of the achievements we had. And out of these programs that I mentioned that are in the clinic, they're all true first-in-class, if not only-in-class kind of approaches that address highly unmet medical needs. So really looking forward to see those continue. And obviously, we continue to push hard on the CTI model. Originally, it was only 4 brick-and-mortar facilities that we had in Boston, New York, San Francisco, San Diego. But given the success, we've started to expand this a little bit, also virtually tying in other parts of the US, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region to really make sure we find truly the best science that we can then follow. And one advantage I haven't managed to mention so far is the fact that we actually work therapeutic area agnostic, versus the rest of the research units within the Pfizer R&D organization have focus on their respective therapeutic areas, be it rare diseases, oncology, inflammation, immunology, or internal medicine or vaccines. We can work across all these therapeutic areas and utilize all therapeutic modalities that are available within Pfizer, which is really a broad range, from the classical small molecule to antibodies to gene therapy to RNA as a, more recently as well. And so that gives you really a great arsenal, a great toolbox that you can offer to academic PIs and really work with the best in the world to help translate an early stage idea that could really provide breakthroughs for patients into true therapies.
Yeah, that angle of being able to apply some of the more novel therapeutic moieties is extremely exciting. And looking as you were just you just went through the sort of the four baskets in terms of inflammation, immunology, oncology, rare disease, and internal medicine. And I was just as I was going through those on the internet and looking at some of the things you're working on, I thought we could just chat about a couple of these because they're really interesting. One of the ones that stood out to me in the inflammation immunology bucket was the fact that you're looking at the platforms that target the undruggable targets. And for an industry sort of that's always existed, first thing anyone ever asked me when he came in, what's the target of this thing? Now we're going after the undruggable, looking at things like displacing modifiers, transcription factor targeting, and so forth. Talk a little bit about this era of going after the undruggable, if you would.
Yeah, I think the term undruggable is a fairly vague term to some degree, right? Undruggable just means we haven't understood how to go after it to date. I'm very confident that we will be able to go after them. Sometimes it's a modality question because if you try to get to targets that are located inside the cell, obviously an antibody wouldn't work. If you're trying to get to targets located inside the nucleus, then your small molecule and antibody might be struggling. If you go for targets in the brain, your blood barrier is a big challenge to overcome. So there's a number of these things. But for CTI, one of the key mandates we have is to really look into novel platforms as well as novel areas of biology. And where those two intersect is really, I think, where we have our strength. A couple of the areas that we're focusing in includes DNA damage response and repeat expansion diseases. I'm not sure you want to go a little bit more in detail there, but I think both of them really hold a lot of promise. I'm thinking about the DNA damage piece. Genomic instability is a hallmark of cancer, driven by replication stress, and the DNA damage response and repair mechanism has really surfaced as a key pathway to exploit, vulnerabilities of cancer cells. And genes involved in the DNA damage response are linked to the expansion of repetitive DNA elements that cause multiple diseases. And we're exploiting, unique disease biology and leverage the expansion of druggable space really to potentially develop first-in-class therapies. And oncology is probably one of the main indications, but certainly it can go significantly beyond that. Closely linked to this is the repeat expansion diseases. Repeat expansion disorders are diseases that are caused by what seems to be an uncontrolled expansion and duplication of DNA sequence repeats, often trinucleotides, but other numbers have been reported as well. And such repeats are really thought to be driven in a number of neuromuscular complications, like myotonic dystrophy, like DM1 or DM2, Huntington's disease, Friedreich's ataxia, and so on and so forth. And so for us, the way we tackle this is really we're trying to build a network with academic PIs that work in this space and are key leaders in that space, and do so anywhere in the world. But by working with them in a complementary fashion, not competitive, but complementary, where each of these connection points to the outside brings in a distinct, unique kind of area of expertise to the table, where able to better understand the biology, but then B, based on that, can also start to deduct what are probably the most attractive targets that you can tackle. And after that, you can then sit back and say, okay, what's the best modality you want to go after? Like you said, undruggable, limits you a little bit in some ways, but I think we're really trying to expand into the so-called undruggable space by better understanding biology, better understanding where to intervene, and better understanding how to intervene with an ever-growing arsenal of tools, not just the classical small molecule antibody, protein, gene therapy kind of approach, but also going, for example, with RNA or going with degraders, going by targeting deubiquitinases, going by really, novel, interesting approaches that hold a lot of promise, but will need some further development and hence require close partnership with the external world.
And continuing along that, and obviously you've been transitioning over the years, as you were mentioning, from the small molecules to obviously the mRNA therapies, gene therapies, as you were mentioning with the Spark Therapeutics collaboration. But Pfizer's also in the sort of the in silico space now as well. And I have this sort of a digital health initiatives going on. And then I had the CEO of Aon Labs on the show a couple of months ago, and here's a sort of an artificial intelligence drug discovery development company that Pfizer's collaborating with. Another case of, not just Pfizer, but there's Amazon and other big pharma there. I came across a very interesting presentation that you gave a couple of years ago entitled, "Is Pharma Ready for Artificial Intelligence?" And in this presentation, you sort of go into all aspects of these AI and other tools in pharma. Talk a little bit about where you are, sort of your personal thoughts on sort of these in silico methods in 2022 as part of everything that you do at CTI.
Yeah, I think that artificial intelligence, or probably a better term right now, is still machine learning. So I'm not sure whether we're truly at the level of our artificial intelligence as of yet. I think we're striving for it. We're seeing some indications of it, but I think it's really still more machine learning that we're seeing. It holds a tremendous potential for several reasons. So number one, the amount of data that you're collecting in a single experiment, in a single clinical study, are ever increasing. From biomarkers to the classical readouts to clinical chemistry and so on and so forth. And it becomes more and more difficult for the human eye to really track and follow and process appropriately. So machine learning has the big advantage that you can really bring large number of data in a very coherent, objective manner and try to track certain trends, directions out of it. That requires that obviously you do have a very clean data set, and that data set needs to be amenable to the question you're asking. I think often we're still struggling with what is the question that we're trying AI or machine learning to address. And if the idea is, well, what's the ideal target in oncology, for example, that's the question. We know we're not going to get there, with that kind of broad question. You have to be really specific and really apply the question with the data set towards the impact you're looking for. So I think there are a number of areas where we've started to see AI and machine learning making its impact. I think in the chemistry, design features have really stepped up. I think in the processing of large clinical imaging and other data cohorts, we've started to see imaging analysis and machine learning driven by it make really big impacts, be it in oncology or other indications. And I think going forward, I would expect that you also start to see a greater impact of AI and machine learning on addressing biology questions in the sense of, for example, what are the key nodal points in a broad network of players that have been associated through thousands of publications, but really trying to understand the network and dependencies better among these players. And I think that will be key also in helping to prioritize what targets to go after versus what targets might be more redundant to each other. So I think the potential is really there. I think we're seeing a large number of AI companies emerging over the last few years. I think we're seeing a lot of incubators in that space emerge. We have made a couple of partnerships in that space. You mentioned Aon Labs, where we're an active partner in as well, but we have a number of additional partnerships that we're having in place and are developing as we speak, actually. And they will address all these different parts that I mentioned to you before, from really data crunching and processing to really, at the end, ideally better understanding biology and clinical phenotypes.
In In the CTI's internal medicine basket, one of the interesting targets were mechanisms addressing cachexia associated with chronic disease and aging. And this was quite interesting because we think of cachexia or muscle wasting, especially things like cancer therapy, HIV. And then you bring the aging part in, and I would love to get your perspective because we've done a lot of shows lately on sort of this evolving, we'll call senescence or biolongevity space. That's sort of, it's kind of embryonic now, but it's starting to grow. And Pfizer's been very active in recent years on other fronts related to aging in terms of partnerships with AARP and then the Project Catalyst and so forth. Could you say a few words about just what you're doing in that space? And I'd love to get your perspective in general on where you think sort of the broader, I don't want to call it longevity, but senescence, anti-health span related drug development area potentially is going with big pharma.
Yeah, it's actually quite exciting topic. As you said, it's in its embryonic stage. I think you used the words. And I would agree with that, but I do think it's probably one of the next big frontiers that we're looking at. I also agree actually with kind of a little bit the separation that you brought up between longevity and probably some more age-related disease focus, for example. But there's also actually cellular aging, senescence, actually cellular senescence is one of the areas that we focus on through the CTI model in particular. Is there, I think we have start to get a better understanding of the biology of targets, of mechanisms that play into it. I think age-related diseases, you could argue to some degree, have been a focus for obviously Pfizer, but also the rest of the industry. A lot of the cardiovascular complications are age-related. Oncology has an increasing prominence with age. So I think that is clearly a focus of ours. The question that becomes, is longevity kind of in standalone area? And if so, how would you address it? And I think that's where significant challenges still exist because, right now we probably would have to run a really huge trial with tens of millions of people basically to get any significant readout over a period of years, which is completely unrealistic. Right. But I think if you go in a more measured way and start with a number of age-related diseases and try to understand what are the common denominators between those and which of these might be really driven by aging. And AI, machine learning could be actually one key factor here to help to dissect that. I think you will start to get a better understanding what different processes contribute to aging. There might be common processes actually that underlie several age-related diseases that if you could target those, you could envision you would probably be able to tackle a number of diseases and disorders at the same time. But that's really early. I think we know really little about it. Like I said, the cellular aging process, I think we have a little bit better understanding also on the molecular basis when it comes to whole systems longevity. I think that is something that hopefully will be solved in my lifetime because I'm getting up there in age as well. But
me too.
I think it's not ready for prime time right now. So we do have a number of aging-related activities. Clearly, aging is on our mind. But the focus is more on those areas where you can really tackle this, where you have a basic understanding of some biology, where you have a basic understanding of biomarkers you can trace, and translatability of preclinical models to the clinic.
Excellent. One other bucket I'd like to go into while I have you is rare diseases. You mentioned the Spark Therapeutics Pfizer collaboration, and we had Kathy High on the show a couple of weeks ago talking about that and her work at Penn back in the day. The other, the interesting thing, we have a lot of these rare diseases out there with number 6,000, 8,000, whatever they be, and obviously some of these tools, whether it's the gene therapies, are going to be extremely important. The other topic we get into a lot on the show is the principle of repurposing. whether we can take existing drugs, and the one that's popped up a few times with rare disease has been rapamycin. We've talked about Castleman's disease. We've talked about Proteus syndrome and potentially connections there. I always hear, from people out in the field, pharma is never going to be interested in repurposing patents and so forth. I would just love to get your call on repurposing in general. Is this something that is always going to be a no-go? Is it something that's only going to be reserved for the small players? And are big players like the Pfizers of the world looking into repurposing at any level? Because you do have 100+ years there, and probably a lot of compounds sitting in libraries somewhere that have been doing X, Y, and Z. Do you ever think of looking at them and doing any repurposing for some of these rare diseases?
Yeah, I would say constantly, actually. So I think that there's two areas where this could apply. One is, products that are already on the market, therapies that are already out there. But there's also, I think, really a strong drive to think carefully about drugs in your development, in your pipeline, which you might pursue for a certain indication, and a new piece of data might emerge and suggest maybe it does play a role in another indication. Could be rare disease, could be other more common diseases as well. And I think the expansion of this range of potential application is something that we're seeing more and more come through as, I think partly driven, I think this really out of the fact that we are recognizing that a lot of the pathogenic mechanisms that we thought originally might apply specifically to just oncology or to just autoimmune diseases or to just metabolic complications are actually more common in these diseases than we think. I mean, you mentioned early on the immune system. The immune system is not only playing a role in your classical autoimmune disorder of RA or GI-related issues.
Yep.
We know it plays a big role in cardiovascular complications and metabolic complications and oncology. And so on and so forth. So trying to understand how you can maximally leverage actually your understanding in a certain pathway, your understanding on a certain target, the tools you have available preclinically, and also the therapies you have available clinically, how can you maximally provide benefit to patients out of these is, I think, always present. I know in the past, I think it was more hesitancy to use and, for example, market a product and repurpose it for a totally different indication. But I think you have started to see this, and you have started to see certain products actually impacting more than the indication it was originally intended for. And so we certainly invite, academic and clinical investigators all the time to really share with us ideas about potentially additional indications we could go after. And coming a little bit back to the CTI model, we actually are truly following the science. So we have projects that started out, for example, in the oncology space, but then shifted over into the autoimmune space or vice versa, based on the input we had from academic investigators from the outside. And I think that's the right thing to do. I think you always need to follow the science, to make sure you do the right thing. And if it allows you to go into more than one indication, that is great. And it's definitely something we're very keen on pursuing further.
Excellent. Excellent. I was also intrigued to see that you had back in 2006, you had a metformin paper in there, sort of connecting inflammation and vascular endothelial cells and so forth. So you're thinking about repurposing a couple decades ago as well. So that's kind of neat. But anyway,
that's true.
Yeah. One other thing while I have you, we talked about some of these novel moieties, and obviously Pfizer in recent years extremely well known for the mRNA vaccines, but obviously that's, you guys were involved in this research well before COVID came along. Can you say just a few words, take a few minutes just to talk about sort of the non-infectious disease component of mRNA therapies? Are these being looked at in the CTI, or is that sort of a separate component of Pfizer? Anything you can say there, because it is such a timely topic.
Yep, no, happy to. So maybe just to come back a little bit to the introductory comment that you made, the partnership with BioNTech showed that communication and staying in contact is important, even if you might not come immediately to an agreement on a partnership. So the first time I met actually the colleagues from BioNTech was in 2014 at a partnering meeting, but then 2015 visited them in Germany on their headquarters in Mainz. And, we were back then talking about cancer vaccine. It was kind of their main focus at that point. We had a strong interest. And for one reason or the other, we couldn't come to an agreement, but we stayed in contact because I think both parties appreciated what might be possible somewhere down the road. And then sure enough, in 2018, as flu became more of a strategic focus for us, we did the partnership with them on the flu vaccine, which then translated, a lot of activities of that translated into the COVID vaccine, and the rest is well known. But with that, we have made a very significant investment, obviously, into the RNA and delivery space, LNP space as well. And we're certainly looking for ways to further expand benefits to patients through this very new modality called the RNA vaccines. On one hand, in the infectious disease space, that's the obvious one. And we've disclosed a couple of programs there, including the flu vaccine program that I mentioned, as well as some RSV-related work. But we also actually are looking for non-infectious diseases, and we're looking at RNA as a therapeutic approach itself. This could play into a number of indications in the rare disease space. There's some base editing opportunities that relate to RNA. Could play into the oncology space. There's opportunities with cell reprogramming, for example, or cancer vaccines, and so on and so forth. So I think that's where we see kind of the next wave of really expanding the RNA platform into. And then obviously, I do think, and maybe I'm just coming back to my roots, I do think there's additional application opportunities in autoimmune indications and potentially also cardiac and cardiovascular complications. This could be using RNA directly as a therapeutic. This could be through gene editing, could be through cell reprogramming. So I think it is really the RNA opportunity for us has really opened up a complete new toolbox that we can use and that we're very actively exploring internally and through external partnerships.
Excellent. Excellent. Wait, one final thing while I have you, and I mentioned in the beginning in the bio, sort of the Emerging Science Liaisons. They're located sort of all over the place around the globe. What is the process for young investigators, startups, so forth, for liaising with Pfizer, getting involved with ES&I, with CTI? Talk with us a little bit about the model, and then ultimately how they can reach out to the Pfizer organization.
Yep, no, happy to address that. So we do have our Emerging Science Liaisons, as we call them, correctly, that are basically a search and evaluation function that are globally distributed. So on one hand, we have very seasoned PhDs or MDs that know the field they're working on, that are totally focused and dedicated towards finding external opportunities out there. At the same time, we felt it's important they're closely connected to the internal R&D efforts as well, to make sure you don't bring something in that's not a strategic fit or that just wouldn't go forward. And so we have these folks embedded also with our research units. So they sit with the leadership team of oncology, they sit with the leadership team of the vaccines group, the autoimmune group, and so on and so forth. So these folks really know immediately what's of interest and what's not of interest, and they would be the first go-to person to really approach, have a conversation with, have it assessed, and then follow up accordingly. And what we're looking for is not a big surprise, right? We're looking for a strong project rationale. Obviously, you want to have a defined target, a defined mechanism, ideally some early data that exists around it. We're looking for a strong strategic fit within our therapeutic area of focus, but we've also actually helped the organization to expand into new areas. We mentioned gene therapy earlier. Pfizer had no internal efforts when we started the activities through partnering. By now, we have one of the largest gene therapy portfolios in the industry through internal build and external partnering. So it could be something new, but again, these liaisons will know what's kind of potentially a fit or not. So don't hesitate of bringing outstanding new ideas forward. Have the conversation, reach out. You know, we like always to look at non-confidential data packages first. You know, we will be looking forward to have a conversation with the company or with the PI to really understand better also what their interests are, what they're looking for out of the partnership, what they think they can bring to the table, would like to bring to the table. The one important advice I would give is always don't try to oversell. We all understand that nothing is ever perfect. The question is it as good as it needs to be? And I think being honest about what one has and does not have, being honest about what one is looking for or not looking for, helps tremendously for both parties actually to come to agreement faster and actually have a much more fruitful partnership down the road.
Outstanding. The last thing, any upcoming conferences, presentations, places where we can see you, meet you potentially, anything else for 2022 that you want to mention, specifically with regard to Dr. Uwe Schoenbeck, please take the floor.
You know, there's a lot of partnering events. The big ones would be JP Morgan and Bio, where we typically have presence, and I think that's well known. But we like to stay with the science. So a lot of our folks, including myself, go to scientific conferences, you know, Keystone, Gordon, whatever there is within our focus areas. I think it's really about us learning about cutting edge emerging biology and getting to know investigators that work in that space. So be prepared to see us anywhere in any exciting meeting or conference that you see. Obviously, things that fall within the RNA space, the AI space, some of the key disease indications we talked about, oncology, vaccines. We will be present. We will be actively looking. And I would encourage everyone not to be shy and reach out if you don't see us at a meeting. It's pretty easy to find us through the website.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Really amazing set of programs you have there. Rooting you on for everything you're doing in all these areas of unmet medical need. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode across our various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Dr. Uwe Schoenbeck, Chief Scientific Officer, Emerging Science and Innovation, Senior Vice President, Worldwide Research and Development and Medical at Pfizer. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about everything you're doing. Obviously, thank you for doing it all these years. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people out there via what you're doing. It's a really great story. And as I said, I'm going to continue to root you and Pfizer on in all this.
Appreciate it. Thanks again for having me here.
Good seeing you.